And good afternoon to everybody out there. And I hope you're having a joyous and wondrous day. It's a bit misty and rainy here in Pittsburgh, but it's still very warm and humid. Hello, James. Welcome. I love to see the regulars coming back. There's Shelley. No rain yet, but it will come. Um, Marlene, good afternoon. I think we have quite a gathering today. That's because you can't go out in the sunshine. I know. Uh, but James Joyce does have a way of drawing people together. And that's what we're talking about. James Joyce's Ulysses. You see it up behind me on the bookshelves. Yet again, as usual, we thank the Allegheny Foundation for their very gracious sponsorship, which makes all of this, well, we'd be doing it anyway, but it makes it so much easier in that all the costs are covered. Because even though the webinars are free to you, they're not free to us. We have to pay for the use of the website and the various other bits and pieces, the platform, and when we have guests on, we have to cover the cost of them. So Allegheny Foundation have made it so much easier for us to do this. And through that, as you know, all the webinars are now on our YouTube channel, as are the alerts. And so you can check back on any previous webinar you like just by subscribing to the YouTube channel. It doesn't cost you anything. Put your name down and we'll always be there at your beck and indeed your call. We're going to have these free forever. Hello, Grace. Beautiful warm evening in Dublin. Yeah, it's warm afternoon here, but somewhat sticky. David. This Bloomsday. Well, Bloomsday is next Wednesday, but today is a Bloomsday, if you like, since that's what we're talking about. Hello, Fitzjamie. Welcome to you too. I'll be giving you information in a little while about our actual Bloomsday activity, which is, of course, next Wednesday. And there you have it. Any questions you have about today's topic, type them in the chat, send us an email, whichever, and you will get a response to it. We always try to do our very best to respond to every email we get. And because of that, because we're very loyal to you, we also ask you to be very loyal to us. And if you can make a donation, use the website, www.picttheatre.org, and you'll find a donation button, and every single donation counts. As I keep on saying to you, it doesn't matter how big, how small. Big is good, small is every bit as good, because every single dollar counts, and it all adds up in the end to help us continue to do the work we do, and that we are planning for our 25th season, which will be beginning in the fall, or for those of you not in America, the autumn. So every donation counts, every dollar counts, every punt, every pound, every zloty, every whatever, every euro, it all adds up. Hello, John from Toronto, welcome. So do please go to the website, have a look at it. You'll find how to subscribe to the webinars, or to the YouTube channel. You'll find out how to donate, and you'll find out other interesting pieces of information. Hello, Ken. Yes, well, hearing the word unlocked. Oh, if only I were that good. But as I will explain it when I start talking about it, just how inadequate I am. But anyway, we will do our best to give you an introduction to the particular topic. Like with all of these webinars, it's not a lecture. It's not that I'm any great world authority. What I do hope is that of the things I talk about and the things that others contribute into the conversation about, as we've had over the last 3 or 4 weeks, that it gives you the encouragement to go away and do your own research and find out more yourself. Because, my long hope is that all of you become infinitely more expert on any of these topics than I could ever be. So if we are just making you ask questions about materials that you've read, plays that you've seen, subjects that you've heard about, if it encourages you to go away and read up and do research and find out more, then the webinars have served their purpose. Hello, Alan and Mary Lou. Welcome. Oh, no, I'm Alan. It's Barry. You see, I can't even read today. I'm Alan. That's Barry. Hello, Barry and Mary Lou. What is that edition of Ulysses on my shelf? Well, to tell you the truth, that is not the book. That is the annotations to the book, which is as thick as the book itself. Just about every reference in the book that most people reading it say, what's that mean? It's explained in that book. I had that some time ago, and I think, as usual, I lent it to somebody who maintained it as a permanent loan. But somebody very kindly gave that to me as a birthday present this year. So I now have my annotated back again. And believe me, I've read the book quite a few times now, and I still need annotations. Joanne from England. Oh, from Edgewood. You see, I can't read today. I think I'm losing my mind. Welcome to you. JR. Yes, it is a hard read, but I think most people who do get through it and get through it with some degree of understanding and appreciation of all its references do realize that at the end of the day, they're glad they read it. And I hope I'll explain why that happiness comes, or that sense of achievement comes. Hello, Dennis from Greensburg. Dennis, I bet you've read it. I bet you have. So, as I say, the purpose of today is going to be about looking at why people think it's wonderful and why people think it's a problem. But James Joyce was a remarkable human being, right? And because of that, it made him a remarkable writer. James, hello from Crafton. I hope you're keeping well. Anyway, how are we doing? We'll give it another minute for those still parking their cars or bicycles. To be honest, you've not read it, just chapters. Well, Dennis, let's hope after today you'll read the fill-in chapters and get a whole grasp of the whole thing. But I'm delighted that you've read chapters, because even if people read chapters of it, it is in itself, every chapter is a point of fascination. There is so much to be gleaned from it. And we'll talk about that. But as I say, in 1 hour, there's a very limited amount I can talk about with regard to James Joyce and this particular book. But let's hope it serves as a kind of nudge to everyone to go and do a bit more research into this book that everybody talks about and very few have actually read. And why it's considered to be such an important work of literature. Now, how are we doing? I think those who are Toby. Yes, I think Toby, I would agree with you that when you read an analysis of the book, you really do come to understand just how little about it you actually know. But it's a bit like looking at any great work of art, and I'll say this again later on. When you look at a truly great work of art, you don't see it all. You have to go back and go back and go back. And the more you look at a great painting, a great sculpture, a great piece of literature, a great piece of poetry, the more you look at it, if it is truly great, the more you discover A, its simplicity, and B, its complexity, and the fact that both of those are intertwined. A great work of art should be looked at as its entire entity, but it should also be looked at in its detail. And all its detail will reveal is just how gloriously simple the work is. If you're ever in Rome and you go and stand in front of Michelangelo's La Pieta, and you see this exquisite piece of work in marble, and you stand and you look at it, and it is extraordinarily beautiful. And then you start examining it and looking at its details, the fine details that he achieved. And in its complexity, you just see how divine its simplicity is. Good prep for next week. Yes, I am. Well, I think I tell you, I need all the help I can get preparing for next week. Anyway, I think we'll make a start now. And I'll start by saying that next week, On Bloomsday, we will be reading 10 extracts. As we did last year, we did 8. This year, we're spoiling you, and we're doing 10 extracts. And we're starting, I think, at 10 a.m. On Bloomsday, and we will read an extract every hour on the hour until we've read 10 of them. And we begin with the first chapter and we end with the last chapter and do a selection of 8 chapters in between. And the purpose of this reading next week is purely to introduce you to the idea of the text. We're not reading whole chapters, we're just reading extracts, and they'll be between 15 and 20 minutes long, with quite a few of your picked favorite actors reading extracts. And even me, I'm actually going to read one this year as well, so I'm sorry about that. But let's talk a little bit about it. Okay. To begin with, one should always start a good talk with to begin with, just like a good fairy tale. To begin with, I am no authority on Ulysses or James Joyce. In the vast world of people who have read James Joyce and have read Ulysses, very few people are authorities. So before I say anything else, I will say in all honesty and humility, James Joyce and Ulysses scares the hell out of me. And I bow to the experts who wish to dispute with me on any of the comments I may make. One of my old friends, Senator David Norris in Dublin, member of the Irish Senate and a former lecturer in Trinity College, is probably one of the leading experts on the works of James Joyce, and particularly on Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. And many a time and oft, he spent 15 to 20 minutes telling me how I misunderstand one sentence. So I am not an authority. And this is not a lecture on the book. I will give you some facts as best I know them and some personal reflections. But as I often say to you, everything I tell you may be wrong. This is my thoughts, that's all. But what I want to do is to give you some encouragement to give that novel a well-deserved try. And I'll tell you as a simple fact, I first attempted to read the novel many years ago. I was in my 20s. I failed. I did succeed in my 30s. I read it in my 30s, but I knew I hadn't really read it. I just managed to get through it. Then I read a book of commentary, somewhat similar to the one behind me. And then I realized what the book actually was. Not so much what it was about. I knew what it was about. But I began to realize by reading commentaries what the book actually was. It was Dublin in 1904. It was a treatise on the human condition. But it took me a lot further reading to realize just how much the book encompassed. And every return to it shows more and more. And as I was just saying about looking at any great work of art, Michelangelo's Pieta, the more you look at it, the more it shows you, the more it reveals itself to you. That's what great works of art can and should do. And that is exactly what Joyce's Ulysses does. It is not simply a novel. One might say in terms of modern writing, it is the novel. James Joyce was born February the 2nd, 1882, which was when other and very different Irish literary luminaries were actually in their ascendance. People like George Bernard Shaw, Oscar Wilde, they were beginning to be, and indeed were, the great accomplished Irish writers of their time. And in that period, James Joyce was born. By the way, side thing, he was born in Brighton Square, Rathgar, in the city of Dublin, and some friends of mine actually owned the house. We had many a party there, and they always complained about the fact that all summer long, because there was a plaque on the wall outside, all summer long vast numbers of Japanese tourists would stand outside their house taking photographs. It was deeply annoying. Never by a place where somebody important was born. So he was an Irish novelist, short story writer, poet, teacher. He was a literary critic. One would describe him as part of the avant-garde movement, but he's also regarded in academic circles and literary circles as, and this is important, the most influential and important writer of the 20th century. It's a very grandiose thing to say, but there is a reason behind it, because nobody can be described as the most important. It depends on your perspective, it depends on where you're coming from. But because of the way he wrote, because of his methodology in writing, he introduced something that was quite positively unique. He was somebody who changed the nature of his art in the way that Samuel Beckett, who was a disciple of Joyce's, changed the nature of his art, in the way Shakespeare changed the nature of his art. Every now and again, an artist comes along, or a scientist, or a philosopher, a teacher, a mathematician, who changes the way we see things. And James Joyce was one of these. He's probably best known for Ulysses, in which he used a phenomenally clever technique. Now, you've often heard me say there's nothing new in literature, there's nothing new in theatre, there's nothing new in art, there's nothing new in the world. Everything that we know, we have done before. There are no new plays, there are simply reworking of the plots of plays that went before. There's the old adage, there are only 7 plots. I've never worked out what they truly are. I've got a big book upstairs in my study which tells me what the 7 plots are, but I don't believe it. But every plot, every play that's ever written is just a reworking or a reevaluating of something that's gone before it. Because when the Greek poets started defining the human condition and creating theatre as we eventually grew to know it, they sort of examined all those major themes. And every writer since has re-examined them. What Joyce did when he set about writing this novel was to take another one and use its themes. So one of the first important things to understand when you read Ulysses is it's not Homer's Odyssey. It is not a rewriting of Homer's Odyssey. It is not a modern version of Homer's Odyssey. What he did was to take the structure of the journey that Homer describes in the Odyssey, the journey back from Troy to Ithaca, and the trials and the tribulations and the discoveries and the human behavior, the human reactions that Homer's Odyssey provided as a platform, as a scaffolding, if you like, and wrote another book, and he called it Ulysses because he was honoring Homer, and he followed Homer's journey, but with his hero as a simple Jewish Dublin man on a journey from home to home. So what Joyce was doing even at that level was what all great artists do, stealing. He stole some thematics and wove an entirely new web around them. He wrote some other wonderful pieces as well. There's a book of short stories, and if you haven't read them, you really should. They're called Dubliners, and they're infinitely easier to read. They are very simple, they're very pure, they're very beautiful, and they're all about simple human condition. The most famous of which is The Dead, which was actually filmed brilliantly by John Huston, the last film he ever made, with pretty much a totally Irish cast. And it is a gorgeous movie. And in fact, Pitt Classic Theatre many years ago presented a musical version of it called The Dead. But this series of short stories, Dubliners, is quite exquisite. He wrote another major novel called Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. I'll mention that in a second. That preceded Ulysses. And long time after Ulysses, back in 1939, he produced possibly the most, I dare I say, impossible to read novel ever, called Finnegan's Wake. When he wrote poetry, he wrote a play, and did some journalism as well. He was not prolific in the normal conventional sense, but he was prolific in the sense that his notion of writing covered quite a broad spectrum. It was not simply just a novelist. If one can describe Joyce as simply a novelist. Came from a middle-class family, very brilliant student apparently. But he also suffered, dare I say, an Irish Catholic education at the turn between the 19th and 20th centuries. Catholic Ireland was dogmatically, conservatively Catholic. His first school was Christian Brothers at the O'Connell schools. Then he went to Belvedere College and Clongowes, which were Jesuit, which was not easy because his father had kept running out of money, so they had to keep paying fees. But it is important to recognize in one thing when you're reading this, that he did have a staunchly, profoundly conservative Catholic education in Dublin at the end of the 19th century and going into the 20th. He then went on to attend University College in Dublin, and at that time, again, religion dominated. University College Dublin had been founded by Cardinal Newman. Trinity College in Dublin was Protestant, and there was that very precise difference. So his education was entirely Catholic. How that affected him, we might come to. By 1904, a significant year, and in his early 20s, Joyce left Dublin, went to the continent with his partner, who eventually became his wife, Nora Barnacle. He then lived severally in Trieste, in Paris, in Zurich, in Rome. He paid some visits back to Dublin, but he never truly came back. He became a committed European in that sense. But he took Dublin with him here. Dublin never left his mind. And although you could say pretty much all of his adult life was spent abroad, his fictional universe, everything he wrote about, was centered on Dublin. And it's populated largely by characters who are Dubliners. The title of that book of short stories is the perfect title for all of his writing, Dubliners and the city of Dublin. They were based on his family, his friends, his enemies, quite a few on his enemies, but they were all quintessentially Dubliners, and Dubliners of that time. Ulysses is set with absolute precision in the streets and alleyways of Dublin in 1904. He actually said, just around after the publication of it, when he was asked why he wrote so precisely about Dublin, and he said, I always write about Dublin because if I can get to the heart of Dublin, I can get to the heart of all the cities in the world. In the particular is contained the universal. And it's a deeply important point when you read the book, because he is writing specifically and accurately with geographic precision about Dublin. And the nature of all the characters in the book are quintessentially Dublin. But by being that specific, that precise, he is in a way encouraging you to say, this is the world. Because if you look at your own city, your own place of birth, your own society, your friends, your family, your enemies, in the way that he does, you begin to see there is a universality into what he writes. That people are people wherever they come in the world. That attitudes are attitudes. The political opinion is as prejudiced here, now, today in Pittsburgh or London or Dublin as they were in 1904 in Joyce's Dublin. That he is writing a universality by writing an absolute specificity. And this is also true of all art. What makes art classic, if you like, is that it is specific and therefore universal. that it is not only true of its time, but for all time, but of its place and for all places. Terribly important when you look at this. Before Ulysses, he wrote a book called Portrait of an Artist, and about himself to a large extent. Couldn't get it published. Eventually, he rewrote it as a different book called Stephen Hero. That never got published. He eventually rewrote the whole thing as Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, which was based very much upon himself, but is the character of Stephen Dedalus who materializes in Ulysses as well. In 1904, as I say, a very significant and important year, he actually first met a young woman from Galway who became his girlfriend, his partner, and eventually his wife. Her name was Nora Barnacle. She was working as a chambermaid. And the most significant date, and I'm going to use a slightly rude word, on the 16th of June, 1904, the day upon which Ulysses is set, Joyce and Nora Barnacle had their first day out together, their first date. And they walked to the Dublin suburb of Ringsend, right at the mouth of the River Liffey, where they sat upon the grass in a secluded spot, and Nora masturbated him. And he wrote about it. This event was commemorated in Joyce's literature, in his mind, in his memory, as the date for the action of Ulysses, and is known as Bloomsday, the 16th of June, 1904, which is why we celebrate it on the 16th of June. He did remain in Dublin for a little while after that, but he was drinking very heavily. One of his drinking binges, the story goes, he got into a fight with a man on St. Stephen's Green, and he got injured, and he was picked up and dusted off by a guy he vaguely knew called Alfred Hunter, who took him home to his home, looked after his injuries. Hunter was supposed to be rumored to be a Jew and to have an unfaithful wife, and would serve as one of the models for Leopold Bloom. We find our characters on the streets around us. All the characters in Ulysses are identifiably Dubliners. He took up with a medical student, became something of a writer himself, Oliver St. John Gogarty, who sort of became the role model for the character of Buck Mulligan. He stayed with him for a few nights in the Martello Tower in Sandymount, which is on Dublin Bay. And the Martello Towers were built to protect England and Ireland from the Napoleonic invasion that never really came. You can go and visit the tower now. It's known as the Joyce Tower for obvious reasons. He had an altercation with another guy staying there, a man called Tench, Haynes in the book. Haynes fired a pistol, bang, at some pots and pans hanging over the head of Joyce. So Joyce left immediately, walked the 8 miles back to Dublin, sent a friend to the tower, got all his clothes back, and very shortly after, Joyce and Nora left Ireland to live on the continent forever. So even the events of that night provided a background for the book. Gogarty as Buck Mulligan, the Martello Tower, where the very first chapter is set. Haynes, the character of Haynes being based on a real person. He found his fable in his reality. He was a lapsed Catholic. Some people have argued endlessly that he wasn't a lapsed Catholic and that his writing was very much a Catholic expression, on the basis that many a devout Catholic writes against the church. No church possibly in history has so many adherents who hate it, or at least not necessarily hate it, but find objection to it and argue against it. It's one of those, it's like marriage. You may be married to somebody all your life, but you still see all their faults. This is one of the arguments put forward. I don't have an opinion on it. I don't know, but I do know the way from the information that we have, how Joyce behaved towards the church. the argument is put, and I'm quoting here, his parting with the faith was succeeded by a not so obvious reunion. So therefore, Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake are considered by some essentially Catholic expressions. I disagree. Another of the experts, that the outlook of a serious Christian is beneath the veneer of the work, and there lies there a remnant of Catholic belief and attitude. I find that, again, somewhat a dubious opinion. In fact, Joyce himself responded after completing Ulysses, I'm quoting again, in response to the question, when did you leave the Catholic Church? Joyce answered, that's for the church to say. Ken, that's exactly the point. You can leave the church, but the church never leaves you. Once a Catholic, always a Catholic. But that's the attitude of the church, not necessarily of you. It also follows up of once a priest, you can be defrocked. Once a priest, always a priest. Not quite sure whether any of this is true. For instance, again, quoting, Joyce takes a didactic approach, both affirming and denying, saying that Stephen, that's Stephen Dedalus in the books, his much noted non serviam is qualified. I will not serve that which I no longer believe. And that non serviam will always be balanced by Stephen's I am a servant. So the argument is constantly back and forth. Did Joyce leave the church, or did Joyce write from a Catholic perspective? I think he wrote from the perspective of someone who had a severe Catholic education in a very conservative Catholic world. He did attend masses, especially during Holy Week, but I think much like Oscar Wilde, this was probably for aesthetic reasons. Oscar Wilde always said that, at the end of the day, if he had to choose a church, and he was brought up in Protestant Dublin, he had to choose a church, it would be the Catholic, but mostly because he loved the ceremonies, he loved the rituals, he loved the beauty of it, the music of it. And I suspect that Joyce, as a master of words, had a very similar feeling, that he wanted words and the beauty of words. Again, I quote here, it was reported that Joyce cried secret tears upon hearing Jesus's words on the cross. And another suggested he was a believer at heart because of frequent attendance. I personally think that if he cried secret tears, it was because of the beauty of the language and the complexity of the literature aspect of the story of Jesus than any particular faith or in the dogmas of the Catholic Church. But certainly Catholicism is very represented in its various faces in the novel Ulysses. There always seems to be, to my mind, a decidedly jaundiced view of its practitioners and its practices. But it's no more a book of Catholicism than it is a tract of sex or alcoholism, both of which are equally represented within the nature of the book. You could argue that this is a book about drink. You could argue it's a book about sex. Actually, that's probably closer to the truth than to say it is a book about Catholicism. But what it in fact is a slice of the life of a city. A journey that encompasses places of birth and death, of love and passion, of politics and personal opinion and prejudice, of eating and drinking, of living and dying. It's all there in the book. In other words, from beginning to end, this is a book about life and death in a slice. It's as though he has taken one slice of life in one single day, in one single place, and in that he has given us a picture of the universality of life and places and time. The novel takes place over one day. Homer's original took place over 10 years. But fundamentally, it's a portrait of a city. And not just Joyce's city, all cities. The characters may be Dubliners, quintessentially Dubliners. The place may be Dublin, quintessentially Dublin. And on the 4th of July, the 4th of June, the 16th of June, 4th of July, what am I talking about? The 16th of June in 1904. But it is, because it is that specific, true of all time and in all places. He didn't write a vast number of novels. He died in 1941. But by his death, he had done something that was quite remarkable. And as I said at the beginning, puts him up there with those great changers of art, those people who bring art, just make this huge step forward, suddenly, brilliantly. Shakespeare did it. Beckett did it, and Beckett was a disciple of Joyce, worshipped him. And Joyce took this great leap forward, if you like. It is what we would describe as a modernist novel. It began, like a lot of novels at the time, back to Oscar Wilde, serialized in the American journal, The Little Review, who began to serialize at the end of around 1920. First published entirely in Paris in 1922 on Joyce's 40th birthday. But the important point, that's just dates. What matters is it has been considered for a long time now one of the most, if not the most important pieces of modernist literature. Quoting, it has been called a demonstration and a summation of the entire modernist movement. Thank you for that, Andrew. We can put that recommendation up as commentary on our website. One critic, quote, before Joyce, no writer of fiction had foregrounded so much the process of thinking. And that's a very important point about this when you start to read the book, to understand what is actually being written. It is not about the words, it is about what the words represent. Ulysses chronicles the appointments, the encounters, the journey of Leopold Bloom in Dublin in the course of this very ordinary day on the 16th of June, 1904, a day in which an acquaintance of his will be buried. It takes us through life and death, because we will also go past Holles Street Hospital, which is the National Maternity Hospital, birth and death. Now, it's called Ulysses, which is the Latinization of Odysseus, which of course is the hero, who is of course the hero of Homer's poem. And the novel, in a way, establishes parallels rather than similarities, parallels between the poem, the Odyssey, and the novel, Ulysses. And there's a kind of structural correspondence. There is the scaffolding between the characters and the experiences of Bloom and Odysseus. Molly Bloom, his wife, Penelope, Odysseus' wife, Stephen Daedalus, his young friend, Telemachus, Odysseus' son. But what you mustn't think is that the book is a modernization of Homer's epic. It's not. It's not like a let's do Homer, but set it in modern times. It's not like doing a modern dress Shakespeare or something like that. That is not what it is. What it is doing is drawing on Homer for the themes and for the scaffolding upon which to tell a new tale of a journey, of an odyssey. We use the term odyssey now to represent the term a journey, especially if it is a fantastic journey or an unusual journey. And Bloom's journey through Dublin on this day is really quite unusual because of the people he meets, because of the places he ends up, including a brothel. It uses the form and the structure of Homer to create this parallel journey, a journey of one day, not 10 years. It is not a modern version of Homer. They are inspired, the characters are inspired by Homer, but they're not direct reflections on Homer. And Joyce actually takes very considerable liberties with Homer's plot in order to paint this picture of the political, the social, the religious life of his home city. So what he's doing is he's using Homer's character structures to reimagine the nature of the kind of people who live in, who are the tiny world of Dublin in 1904. It's a very clever device. It's a very brilliant device, and others have done it since then. In fact, in a way, you might say Shakespeare did the same thing, because Shakespeare never had an original plot in his life. He stole, as all great artists do, he stole from other writers, Holinshed being the principal one. You steal your plots and then you reweave them to create a new way of addressing this question, what is the human condition? So Joyce was doing that, taking liberties with Homer and painting this remarkable and unique and original, in this sense, picture of Dublin. In addition, the novel also, one of the things that confuses people when they, on first looking into, to paraphrase a poem title, on first looking into Joyce's Ulysses, the novel imitates different styles of different periods of English literature. So each chapter in the book is written in a different way, different style. It's not like opening a book, starting, getting used to it, and then reading on through to the end. Every time you go to a new chapter, there's a new style of writing, a new structure to the way the sentences are produced, the way the thoughts are expressed, the way the language is delivered, the way the story is told. It's told differently, in a different stylistic in each of the chapters. This can make it confusing and, for some people, deeply annoying. But when you understand the purpose behind it, it sort of works. Some of the chapters are poetic. Some of the chapters are literally scripted as dialogue, like a play. Some are reported observations. One chapter is pure interrogation. Somebody asks a question, somebody answers it. Another question, another answer. Another question. Sounds boring, but some of those answers are some of the most beautiful uses of the English language and creative imagination and thought process that I've ever read. And I've read quite a bit. One, over and over, you get this remarkable modernistic element added to all of this that I've mentioned before, the stream of consciousness. And I don't think any novelist prior to Joyce ever explored the depth of the stream of consciousness as well as he did. He has this remarkable gift for tracing the thoughts that lie behind the spoken words and yet letting both streams travel together. In Ulysses, we see the thought behind the words like no other novel before it. When you say anything, when you answer a question, when you say anything, when you make any observation, when you open your mouth and words come out, the words that come out are only a small fraction of what is going on in your consciousness, in your imagination, in your mind. You may say to yourself, I fancy a cup of coffee. But in your mind are all those elements that make up that thought, including what the taste of coffee is, where the coffee comes from, the last time you had a coffee, the worst cup of coffee you ever had, why you hate particular coffee chains. All of those thoughts are there in your head. But what comes out is, I'd like a cup of coffee. What Joyce does is take all of that process, that stream of consciousness that's going on, and marries the thought process with the words that come out. When you see somebody on the street, oh, hi, how are you? In the back of your head is, I don't remember his name. Who is he? Where did I meet him? I know him from somewhere. None of that comes out. What comes out is, hi. But Joyce takes all of that and explains the incredible and poetic process that the imagination goes through before any decision is made. That's his use of stream of consciousness, and it is exquisite. And when you have those sections of the book where Bloom is just walking along, traveling on his journey, having thoughts and speaking and communing with people, every thought is beautifully expressed. In Lestrygonians, when he decides to have lunch, his opinion when he decides not to eat in a particular restaurant because of the kind of food and the way people are eating, his description of the process of eating is one of the, you'd never eat again. To look at the way Bloom sees mastication. Ever since its publication, it has attracted controversy or controversy, depending on your particular taste. For instance, the book was the subject of an obscenity trial in the United States in 1921. The book was banned in Ireland for many, many years, as was the movie. There was a movie produced and directed in 1967 by Joseph Strick, starred Milo O'Shea. When that movie was entered into the Cannes Film Festival, one of those great film art festivals ever, the committee censored, this is 1967 we're talking about, not 1947, 1967, the decade of modernism. When it was entered into the Cannes Film Festival, the committee censored it. Strick withdrew the film, but it did, thank heavens, go on to win an Oscar nomination. It was always considered an adult movie in many countries. The film was banned in Ireland, not just censored, banned in Ireland for being subversive to public morality. And that ban was upheld by the Film Appeal Board in Ireland and banned a second time, wait for it, in 1975. It eventually was lifted in September of 2000 by the then film censor, old friend of mine, because Strick requested for it, and was eventually screened in private clubs, eventually became fully available. But it goes to show that the power and effect of that novel, that the novel was banned, that the movie was banned because it affected public morals. And why did it affect public morals? Because it told the truth. It told the truth about sexuality, about emotion, about drink, about behavior, about politics. Everything in it is truth, not polemic truth. It's not preaching. It's just letting characters say what they think. It's letting characters do what they want, and it allows them to go into a brothel. Brothels do exist, you know, and men go into them. I know it's a shock, but it is true. So it has been filmed, it's been published, it's been read over and over again. In fact, if you want to look it up, go onto the website of the Irish National Broadcaster, RTE, Radio Telefisher, and they did a recording of the complete novel, word for word. It's 33 hours long. I actually have a copy of it. But it is a remarkable piece of work. The BBC have done it, but they edited it. The Irish version is the entire novel, telling every ounce of the story and with remarkably authentic accents as well. Anyway, regardless of the suffering of the novel through censors' red pens and the apathy of various public morality committees, the novel's stream of consciousness technique, the structuring of it, the brilliant structuring of it, the experimental use of prose, the way he actually puts words together, the use of puns, parodies, the level of characterization, the detail of characterization, and the fact that it is very often excruciatingly funny. Now, justifiably, I think, makes it regarded as one of the great, if not one of the greatest works of literature, which is why worldwide Joyce fans celebrate the 16th of June as Bloomsday. Now, briefly about the structure of the book, because we will be presenting some readings of it next week on the 16th. Joyce divides Ulysses into 18 episodes. I'm calling them episodes rather than chapters, 18 episodes, which roughly correspond to Homer's Odyssey. Homer actually divided his story into 24 books. Joyce actually compacted some of them together to create 18. It is posited, if you like, that Ulysses corresponds all its characters and all its themes to those of Homer's Odyssey. I don't think it doesn't actually completely do that, because, as I say, it's not a modernization of Homer. It is a new work structured on the basis of Homer. He doesn't write titles to his chapters or his episodes. We use these titles to describe them, but the titles that we use are actually taken from Homer, not from James Joyce. He just used I think it was a Latin number to tell you that he moved on to the next section of the book. So he actually used names and things from other sources to delineate. Nausicaa is one that I think he lifted from another source. As I say, one ordinary day, each episode taking you to a new place in Dublin. He travels the city in one day. Joyce actually said himself at one point that he was so pleased with what he'd written, because he said if Dublin were to be wiped off the face of the planet, it could be rebuilt as it was on that day in 1904, just from the descriptions within his novel. Slightly grandiose claim, not entirely true, but the general picture is right because of the detail he enters into when describing it. In the chapter Ithica, which is the penultimate chapter of the book, when he describes a walk from the river back to Eccles Street, the journey he takes is 100% accurate, detail by detail by detail. I know, because I walked that journey myself a few times, although not in the same condition of inebriation. So his detail in the addressing of the story, the detail of the book, really does paint an incredibly accurate picture of Dublin. And for those of you who are not in Dublin, for those who've never been to Dublin, if you do go to Dublin, you can do the Joyce tour, the Ulysses journey, because you will find small plaques in brass on the grounds outside each of the places he stopped. And you can still go into Davy Byrne's, although whether you'll get a gorgonzola sandwich, I'm not sure. You can still go shopping for lemon-scented soap in Sweeney's Chemist. All of those places are still there. Most of the places are still there. It's not the same as Homer. There are no violent storms. There are no shipwrecks, giants, monsters. It is a different world from Homer. It is the world of Dublin. After all, Odysseus was a warrior, fought in Troy, journeyed back as an adventurer. Leopold Bloom is a not relatively large Jewish advertisement canvasser. Somebody went around getting people to buy advertisements for the newspapers. Stephen Dedalus, the hero of Portrait of an Artist, corresponds to Odysseus' son Telemachus. Stephen Dedalus is not Bloom's son, but he is a young man that Bloom cares for, and Bloom's wife Molly does correspond to Penelope, Odysseus' wife. Penelope waited 20 years for Odysseus to return. Molly Bloom waits for one day. But the similarities, the balance of pattern is the same. And where Penelope is fighting off unwanted lovers, Molly is dreaming of them. Where Penelope is unraveling this incredible tapestry that she is making and unraveling. The parallel being that Molly is in her final, the wonderful chapter, Penelope, at the end of the novel, unraveling and re-examining the tapestry of her existence with Bloom and others, and her desires and wishes. Now, for those of you who have read the book, because we're getting sort of close to time, and I want to field any questions that may come up and tell you a little about next week. For those of you who have read the book, I congratulate you. For those of you who haven't read the book, I do recommend it to you. Not because it is significant, not because it is important. I recommend it to you because it is rich, it's poetic, and it's glorious. If you haven't read the book, don't do what I did when I was 20. Read it with a commentary. Just because a book is complex, don't make it a bad book. Just because a book is so rich with imagery and ideas that it is hard to follow doesn't mean it's badly written. It means it's rich and complex and beautiful. And rather like a brilliant piece of cuisine, rather like a brilliant sculpture or a brilliant work of art, you don't look at it once. You look at it for its complexity. And when you begin to understand its complexity, its simplicity will appear. Read it slowly. If you find it confusing, don't be afraid to go back to the commentary. I'll give you the name of that one in a second. Read it slowly. You've got to savor it as if it were, food or wine. To my mind, and it's my opinion, I think it is as great a novel as anything by Dickens or Tolstoy or Jane Austen, and for exactly the same reasons. They each encompass stories of all humanity by writing of their own world. Dickens wrote about his London. Tolstoy wrote about his Russia. Chekhov wrote about his Russia. Ibsen wrote about his Norway. Jane Austen wrote about her class in a particular aspect of English society at a particular time, and the rules that governed the way women had to live. But each of them, through the specificity of their writing, encompassed all that is the human condition. And this is why James Joyce's Ulysses is, to my mind, one of the greatest novels, certainly one of the possibly the greatest novel of the 20th century, but one of the great novels of all time, because it does encompass the human, what he set out to do by writing about my city, that slice of time and people in my city on a certain day. I write about all cities at all times, on every day. That's his great achievement. He wrote about every city by writing about his own. So that's fundamentally my introduction to you to the long journey of Bloomsday that I would love you to undertake. John, to answer your question there, the readings will be the same as we presented last year. They were great. Yes, they were. And we will be doing pretty much similar. Most of them will be pretty much the same. We chopped them around a little bit. There are 2 new readings in. We will be having Cyclops, which we didn't do last year, which I'll be reading some of. And we will have a piece from Wandering Rocks, which we didn't do last year. So yes, that is the answer to that. Now, by the way, I'm going to reach back to my shelves and take down this. I recommend this if you want to get it. University of California Press, Berkeley, is the publisher. It is called Ulysses and Annotated. I would recommend you get it. We'll put details, or anybody wants to get information, we'll email it to you. But what this book is literally, and as you see, it's the thickness of the novel itself, but all it is annotated notes on just about every reference in there that might lead to confusion. And it is a testimony to Joyce's own reading, the degree of classical literature that he can draw references from back and forth throughout his entire text. But my advice to you is, if you've never read it before, have an annotated set of annotations, have a commentary, have something beside you to help you through that first time. And the more you read it, the more will become apparent. It'll open up. It's like an advent calendar. You keep opening windows and more reveals itself. There was a question came up there, but I missed it. What was that? My esteemed colleague will try to pop it back up. If you do have any questions, please, or comments, or opinions, or disagreements, do tell me. And yes, they will be archived. Yes, all the information that we give you will be archived. And anything I said, you can check me on by going back and by looking at our YouTube and look at it again and disagree with me at your will. Any other questions coming up there? So next week it is Wednesday, isn't it? Yes, it is Wednesday. And starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, you can, each hour on the hour, and as I say, each reading will be 15 to 20 minutes. You don't have to watch all of them. I'd love you to. Take the day off, do nothing else, just absorb a little bit of Ulysses. But every hour on the hour, to connect with it, go to the website and you'll see a button saying Bloomsday. Push the button and you're in. I think that's all they have to do, isn't it? Yes, that's it. Just put. There'll be a. Yeah. As we will take it through 10 chapters, starting at 10 o'clock with Telemachus at the beginning, and finishing with Penelope, Molly Bloom at the end. The readers will be your favorite beloved picked actors and me. There you have the list: Karen Baum, Ken Bolden, Shamma McHugh, Martin Giles, Sage Smith, Zoe Abian, James Fitzgerald, Hale Reroy, John Visser, Lisa Ann Goldsmith, and me. I think we'll have the actual details of the program on the website. So if there's a particular piece you want to listen to, you can pick that. But I do ask you, have a look at the whole thing if you possibly can. It's only 15, 20 minutes on each hour. Try to see as many as you can. It's free. This is our gift to you, and we will do this every year. However, because of the nature of the beast, and because we ask this group of actors to give their time and their energy for this, we do what we did last year, and we will do this year, and we're going to do each year, is any donation that comes in on Bloomsday will be divided equally between the artists who are doing the reading. It's our gift to them. Bloomsday is our gift to you, and your donations on that day are your gift to them, because they put an awful lot of time and preparation into this. You don't read Bloom just by picking it up and reading it off the page. They put a lot of work into this. So as their reward, any donation that comes to Picked on that day will go to the artists. So please do think about pushing the donation button as well as the Bloomsday button on the day. And that's all we have for you today, except to say, because next Wednesday is Bloomsday and we're on with this, there will not be a webinar next Friday. We will be back the week following that, and we'll have more information about what we're talking about then on the website. And we'll, of course, email every single one of you because we love you so much. In the meantime, I hope we'll see you on Wednesday. Give it a go. Have a go at reading the book. Take my advice with a commentary. If you've read the book and you disagree, I've broken your hearts, please tell me. I'd love to debate it with you. And in the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you on Bloomsday. Bye now.